Back on All Saints weekend, Pastor Nancy was preaching, and she told you that we, that is, pastors, never get used to dealing with death. We're often asked, with all funerals that we do or people's deathbeds that we are at, do you ever get used to this? And the answer is an emphatic no, we don't. But we know that God has the final word, that death is not the end, that we have the hope of the resurrection, and that God is with us every step of the way through this journey of life into death, then into life again. We know because of the word of the Lord that comes to us, and it brings us hope in the face of despair. We especially need to hear that word, this message, today. Because it was a shock. It was a shock to hear and see the news Friday night about the attacks in Paris. It was a shock, and I suspect that many of us had thoughts along the line, well, you may have used other language, and that's okay too, but had thoughts along the lines of, oh no, not again, or will it never end? And what can we do about it? Can we do anything at all? And it would be easy for us to give in to the idea that there's nothing we can do about these acts of terror and hatred and death and destruction. It would be very easy for us to give in to the idea that some people have already voiced, that the only response is to bomb those people out of existence. What can we do? That has been the human question in all the times of trouble of the human race. Because no one can truly guarantee a way out of the mess we have gotten ourselves into. Yes, the mess that we, humanity, all of us, have gotten ourselves into. And that's a topic that is way too broad for me to try to tackle in a sermon. But I'd be very glad and happy to discuss it with any and all of you at another time, perhaps the adult Sunday school class time in the lounge at 9:15. It is the mess that we, human beings, have gotten ourselves into. So what do we do? Well, suffice it to say that the gospel reading from Mark tells us that people were asking the same question 2,000 years ago. And oh, by the way, in the same area of the world. What do we do in times of anguish and trouble? The people in Mark's world faced uncertainties and doubts because of the world's situation. It seemed as if their future was up for grabs. Rome was in power. Rome was in power, and no one knew what that might mean for the tiny countries swallowed up by the world's greatest empire. Justice was only for the privileged, and privileges were only for the favored few. What do we do? Is there anything we can do? The vast majority of people in the Roman Empire felt powerless and overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. Sound familiar? Yeah. And of course then, as is true today, the poor were the ones who suffered the most from decisions made by higher authority. And in the first century, Christians numbered among the poorest of the poor. So there was every reason for the early church to think that the world was falling apart. The end of time had come. And the disciples want to know. The setting, they're at the temple. See what large stones, Jesus. Isn't it grand? Isn't it glorious? This temple of worship to the Lord our God. And Jesus says, not one stone will be left on top of another. Which, by the way, is why scholars believe that the Gospel of Mark was written after 70 A.D. Because in 70 A.D., Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was absolutely demolished. There was not one stone left standing on top of another. And it has never been rebuilt. What do we do in times of trouble, when there is death and destruction, when we think that the end must be coming soon because of all the wars and rumors of war and famine and plague and earthquakes and fire? What do we do? Well, those first Christians also remembered what Jesus said to them, what his response was to these kinds of questions and doubts. He tells his disciples, do not be alarmed. That is a theme that runs through all of Scripture, whether it's angels announcing glad tidings or Jesus walking across the water. The first words are, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Do not be alarmed. These troubles and tribulations that the disciples are wondering about do not mean the end is near. Oh no, far from it. And Jesus, in fact, directs attention away from any speculation about the end times. As he says, I don't know. Only God, the Father, knows. And he ain't telling. He draws the speculation away from what's coming in the future at the end to living in the present day. Martin Luther was asked once what he would do if he had been told that the world is going to end tomorrow. And the story goes that he responded, he would go out and plant a tree. Think about that. If you know the world's going to end tomorrow, why on earth would you go out and plant a tree today? Because we don't know about the future. All we are called to do is live in the present. And for Luther, the best preparation for the future time of Jesus coming back was to trust in God for the present day and to be faithful to his calling right now. And planting a tree is a symbol of hope for the future. It's a good example for us to follow. The way that we Christians live in this world is to be one of hope. It is to be one that bears witness to God's activity in the world and proclaim the good news of Jesus no matter what is going on, no matter what adversity or uncertainty we face or anybody else faces. Our calling as Christians is to trust in God, not give in to our fears. And believe me, I know the fear is real. I get that. I understand that. But I don't know how many of you have followed stuff on Facebook about photos and pictures and news from Paris, but there is one sign that absolutely grabbed my attention. A sign that says, "We weep. Never fear." We weep, yes. Grief, even anger. The suffering of the tragedy is real. And it's stuff that we need to deal with. We need to feel that. We need to have the conversations. We need to give the support. But as soon as we let fear determine how we live our lives, the terrorists have won. You understand that? We should understand that in this country. Things have been very different since September 11th, 2001. We are a country who is giving in to our fear. And that means the terrorists have won. Our calling as Christians is to fear not. Because God is with us. That's the story of Jesus. That's the promise we have. And God is faithful. God is faithful. God will never let us go. So yes, death and destruction and acts of hatred and terror, all of that are part of our human existence. So what do we do? And I know, I feel powerless against stuff that's happening an ocean away. But again, we know that's no guarantee of our safety. So what do we do? All I can do is to work on, take care of the relationships that I have with the people in my own life. And be faithful to that call in the community in which I live. So, no matter what troubles there are in the world, our job, our calling from God is to be faithful. To do what we are called to do. So, parents and spouses and brothers and sisters, be loving. Forgive one another. Talk to each other. Take care of each other. And single or married, working or retired, yes. Be caring in all that you do. In our relationships, we are called to seek peace, to practice hospitality, to welcome one another into a place in our lives. That's what our calling is. In all of our dealings, every single day. To receive all people with the same love and mercy and grace that God has given us. And I know some of you may be saying, well, Pastor, what's that going to do? Well, if I'm loving and caring and forgiving with one person in my life, and they in turn are loving and caring and forgiving with another person in their life, and they in turn, it starts expanding exponentially, who knows what might happen? Who knows what might happen if we are true to our calling to be faithful in showing love and mercy and grace, the same love and mercy and grace and compassion that we ourselves have received from God. So yes, we are to care for those in our midst who are sick or lonely, hungry, those who feel excluded. We are to reach out to them, and we are to reach out beyond our walls in all the ways we possibly can. Because we ourselves have received all that we need from a God who is generous and gives out of abundance. We then can, in turn, be generous and give out of abundance to others, because God never quits giving. God never quits loving us. So, for me, the place where we start is simply to love one another, care for each other, and in turn, each one loves and cares for another. That's where it starts, and who knows where it could possibly end. We don't know. But that is not our worry and concern. Our job is simply to be faithful in our daily lives. Yes, be informed about what's going on. Yes, talk about, discuss ways by which we can deal with these humongous issues that plague our world, that have caused the mess we humans have gotten ourselves into. But do not fear. Do not fear. Instead, let's take the verse from Hebrews, which actually was the second reading appointed for today that we didn't read, but here's a piece of it from Hebrews chapter 10, where it says, "Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. For the one who has promised is faithful." So let us hold fast to the confession of our hope, because God is faithful. But here we go. "And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds." How provoking are you in your life? Do you provoke others? Anybody be provoking? Have you ever thought about provoking instead of to anger or hatred or whatever, to provoke one another to love and to good deeds? It's so easy for us to provoke. That draws a negative reaction. What if we were to stir up, to provoke those passions of love and forgiveness and grace and caring, to do what God requires of us? To do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God, as the prophet Micah says. If we were to do those things, who knows what might happen? Well, so what good is it going to do? We don't know. But if we don't do those things, nothing is going to happen. So, here's a piece that Mother Teresa wrote, or at least she adapted it for use in the orphanage that she ran in Calcutta. And it's called "Do It Anyway." People are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will never be enough. Give your best anyway. In the final analysis, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. Do not fear, Jesus says. Do not be alarmed. For God is with us. God has given us all that we need. And our job is to be faithful to that hope and to proclaim the good news of that hope, that mercy, that love, that forgiveness, that salvation, all of those things that Jesus has brought. To proclaim it by the way we act, by what we say. And one of the strongest messages we can give to our community, to the whole world, is to live in hope, not live in fear. Because God is faithful. And we can entrust ourselves and all things to God. Thanks be to God. Amen.